The first day she walked into our classroom, everyone noticed her eyes. They were not just brown or hazel, not simply the kind of eyes you could describe with a single color. They were deep, almost shadowed, as if they had seen things none of us could imagine. I was in the back row, doodling in the corner of my notebook, but when she looked around the room, I felt the air shift. It wasn't intimidation exactly, it was a quiet gravity. The way her gaze could pin you to your seat without a single word. Her name was Mrs. Ayla, and she was unlike any teacher we had before. She spoke softly, but her words carried, filling every corner of the room without effort. She asked us to write about our earliest memory, and while everyone else scrambled to think of something, I found myself glancing at her every few moments, wondering what hers might be. In the weeks that followed, I realized she rarely smiled, but when she did, it was small and fleeting, like a candle's flame flickering in the wind. Her eyes told more than her mouth ever did. When she called on a student struggling with a lesson, they softened, warm, and encouraging. But sometimes, in the middle of a lecture, her gaze would drift to the window, and her eyes would darken in a way that made my chest tighten. One rainy afternoon, I stayed after class to finish an essay. She was sitting at her desk, grading papers, with a faint frown. I thought she didn't notice me until she said, without looking up, "You write as if you're trying to hide something." I froze, pen hovering over the paper. Maybe I am. She finally looked up, and the weight of her eyes made it hard to breathe. Don't hide from the page. Paper can keep your secrets better than people can. There was no judgment in her tone, just a quiet knowing. I nodded and kept writing, but her words lodged themselves in my mind. Over time, I began to notice things others didn't, how her gaze lingered on the hallway when the bell rang, as if expecting someone, how she sometimes touched the silver bracelet on her wrist like it was a lifeline. Once, during a history lesson, a loud crash from outside made her flinch so violently that the chalk snapped in her hand. She caught me watching, and for a moment, I saw something raw in her eyes, fear, maybe, or a memory she couldn't shake. The turning point came on a cold November morning. The school lost power during first period, and we were told to stay in our classrooms. The dim light from the windows cast everything in muted gray. Mrs. Ayla didn't try to continue the lesson. Instead, she told us a story about a girl who grew up in a place where the streets emptied after dark, where people whispered about the things that happened when the lights went out. She spoke in such vivid detail that I could almost hear the footsteps she described, the doors shutting, the sudden stillness of a neighborhood holding its breath. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes, they seemed to shine, not with tears, but with the reflection of something far away. The room was silent, all of us caught in her story. When she finished, she looked out the window again, as if expecting the darkness to swallow it. A few weeks later, I found myself alone with her again. I had stayed after class to return a book, and the hallways were nearly empty. She was erasing the board, her sleeves pushed up, and for the first time, I noticed faint marks along her forearm, not fresh, but not entirely faded either. She caught me looking and paused, her hand still on the eraser. "You're observant," she said quietly. I wanted to apologize, but instead I asked, "Is that why your stories feel real?" She studied me for a long moment, and the room felt smaller, the silence heavier. Then she said, "Some stories aren't made up. They're just told differently so people can listen without turning away." There was nothing more after that. She went back to cleaning the board, and I left, my heart carrying the weight of her words. Winter came, and with it, a strange tension in the air. One morning, Mrs. Ayla didn't come to class. The substitute said she had taken a leave of absence, but no one knew why. A few students whispered theories, most of them unkind, but I stayed quiet. I kept thinking about her eyes, about the way they could shift from warm to guarded in a heartbeat, Months passed before she returned. When she did, she seemed lighter, though the depth in her gaze hadn't faded. On her first day back, she began the lesson without addressing her absence. But when our eyes met, I thought I saw something like gratitude there, as if she knew I had kept her unspoken story safe. On the last day of school, she handed me back an essay I had written. She didn't write many comments, but at the bottom, in her looping handwriting, she had written, "The world will always need someone who sees what others overlook." I never told her how much that line meant to me. I never told her that, in some ways, I had been watching her the way she had been watching all of us carefully, quietly trying to read the truths that hid between the lines. Years later, when I became a teacher myself, I found myself looking at my students in the same way she once did, noticing the way one boy never met anyone's eyes, the way a girl always carried extra snacks in her bag but never ate lunch, the way laughter could sometimes be just a shield. And every time I caught myself pausing, searching for the untold story in someone's gaze, I thought of Mrs. Ayla and the eyes that taught me how to see dot, because her lessons were never just in the textbooks or the homework. They were in the silences she let linger, in the careful way she spoke, and most of all, in the way her eyes told me that sometimes the hardest truths can only be shared without a single word.